Thanks everyone who's just joined us. Welcome to our 2022 Vivli annual meeting. My name is Rebecca Lee. I'm our executive director, and I think we'll get started. I know some of you who have just joined us. It's great to see some familiar names as well as some new ones as well. Just a few logistics. Oh, sorry. A few logistics for today. This meeting will be recorded, and also please post your questions in the Q&A section as we go along. We'll respond to these in these sections as we'll have a Q&A for each of the segments during the meeting. We really have a great lineup for you. I'll be giving you a very short update now at the beginning of the meeting to tell you a look back over our last year, talk about some of our key outputs that we've had, and to provide you with some outlook and vision over the next year for Vivli. We'll then start in on our data sharing for COVID, reflect back on some best practices and current experience with our COVID panel. We'll then move on to Dr. Susan Gregorek, talking about NIH data sharing and policy changes that will kick in January of 2023. I know there have been a lot of questions about that, and I think that'll be a really interesting panel and discussion. We'll then look at data challenges that Vivli has been partnering in the area of type 1 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease with the Helmsley Charitable Trust and with ADDI. So those are two very different data challenges, one that's just kicked off and one that's just about to start. And then we'll all be able to participate in Next Steps in Discussion, a segment that hopefully all of you will unmute and turn on your cameras if you like, and participate in that segment at the very end. So in this segment, what I'd like to do next is really look forward to giving you a look back and a deeper dive into some of the trends that we've been seeing here at Vivli. A short update on where we've been and an update on some of our projects as well. So let me talk about our numbers today. So we've been sharing through our data contributors close to 7,000 clinical trials. That's the raw data that underpins clinical trials, what we call IPD, or individual participant level data. And those data are contributed by 44 institutional members that are members of Vivli. That has contributed, those data has led to 125 public disclosures or publications, and we'll delve a little bit deeper into the outputs as well as those public disclosures in just a few minutes. When we've looked into our user base, so the user base and the researchers, what we've been seeing is that's been shifting a bit more global. So since 2019, those users were primarily from the US, and that's still the case. So more than half of those users are based in the US. But we've been seeing a shift more towards the European countries and a shift into the Asian countries as well. So that's been slight and over the last 3 years or so that we've been tracking this. And we'll continue to see what our progress has been in terms of our global shift. What I'd like to do next is to bring you into our inventory and think a little bit about what our inventory looks like. This is the first time we've done really a deep dive into our inventory and look at what our researchers requesting and how that actually lines up. We asked some really interesting questions. Before I do this, I just want to remind you about the process. People, if you look at the bottom, people are searching for information in our inventory, making a request and accessing that data, analyzing it and disseminating it. So that's what we're going to be talking about over the next 5 minutes. So the questions that we asked were, what is that actually in the inventory? So we did a kind of deep dive inventory over our 7,000 trials. And what are researchers searching for? What are they actually requesting? And does that line up with the outputs? Is there a pattern that we can predict? So today I thought I would open up the vault a bit to show you exactly what's in the inventory, what people are interested in. So does that line up? And based on searching in the last few years, and I thought I would get all of you involved in this as well in kind of a fun way. So let's get started. We also will look at together, does this pattern we see now perhaps foreshadow what will happen in the next few years on what will be published? So let's unpack this a bit by diving deeper into our trials inventory. We have almost 7,000 clinical studies or trials in our inventory. And what we had was a group at Columbia who helped us do this, look and put them in bins. So each trial was tagged by therapeutic area. Each trial could be having multiple tags. So something could be tagged as, for example, endocrinology and cardiology. And there were overall 28 therapeutic areas that were tagged. The top ones are shown here in circles. There's an additional 17 therapeutic areas that comprise 1% to 3% each. So just keep an eye on these. If you're particularly interested in the therapeutic area, you can follow the color coding in the next few slides. For example, oncology is always going to be yellow. Infectious disease is this kind of aqua color. Metabolism or endocrinology is always going to be a certain color. You can follow those. And then some interesting ones, maybe rheumatology and gastroenterology, so you'll notice those, and I'll show you a few trends on that as we go through. Of course, our biggies are pulmonology, infectious disease, and oncology are what's big in our inventory and being tagged. So I thought we could keep this interactive, is ask you to give me an idea of what you think is the top search term in January of 2020. We've put this link in the chat, and maybe you can take a stab at using the poll everywhere. So look at the link in the chat and come back, and we should start seeing what you all think was the top search term in Vivli in January of 2020 in our database. So I'm seeing COVID come up as one of the terms. Okay, that's a little interesting. Cancer, coronavirus, SARS, oncology, virology, obesity, cancer, mental health, SARS, COVID-19, obesity, oncology, colitis, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, pulmonary. Okay. Great. Okay, so heart, IPF, this is interesting. Okay, I'll just wait one more minute and see if this continues to change. Okay, great. So let's take a look at actually what was the, so now oncology is coming up and probably taking a, oh, black fungus, that's an interesting one, and heart disease. Okay, so we have, I think our front runners are COVID, oncology, and cancer. So we can see what actually was picked as the number one pick. And so what we are seeing here is what researchers were actually looking for in January of 2020, and I think COVID and oncology were really I know COVID was really just starting in January of 2020, is cancer and diabetes. And we had certainly a lot of oncology in that case. I think neurology, depression, and pulmonary. So those were really our top searches in January of 2020. Interestingly, I think COVID was just becoming a thing in January, but we really didn't have that as a top search, which is interesting. And so let's follow this line of thinking into what was being requested, because I think we would think about that being a request type, what actually followed as requests, like proposals coming into Vivli. So that is not surprising that oncology was our most requested, was some of our most requested numbers. So we had 30% of our requests came in the oncology space, about 13% in neurology, and then so on, psychiatry, rheumatology, and cardiovascular disease, infectious disease methods, and gastro. So that's where our requests came in. But I'd like to now take you into where actually were things published. The publications come in about the 12 to 18 month time frame after a request comes in, but on average about 15 to 18 months after a proposal is submitted. So here are where our publications come in. And interestingly, we see, of course, a lot of publications come in oncology, but really rheumatology and gastroenterology are overrepresented here. And here are our publications. So then let's just do this really quickly now, is what do we think the top search term is in Vivli in 2022? Now that you're practiced, let's just see what we think this is going to be. So today, what do people think is the top search term in 2022? And I think we can also make some predictions about what might be published here. Okay, COVID. Any other guesses? COVID-19, mental health, oncology. Polio. Okay, that's great. Depression. Oh, monkeypox. Interesting. Long COVID. Okay. Alzheimer's disease, Ebola. RSV. Colitis. Okay. Okay, so I think there's been a lot of COVID and oncology, but also a couple really interesting other ones as well. So in our top 2022 searches are indeed COVID, and then oncology has been following. So we would anticipate 1 to 2 years from now, if these are requested, perhaps the publications would follow. So we have a number of course, oncology searches as well. Diabetes is a big one. Again, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, and Crohn's disease. So these are our top searches. So I just want to go through the next few slides very quickly to keep us on time. So beyond publications, what we did was we also coded our outcomes because we think outcomes could be beyond publications and really important to us. So we see that what we decided to do is we thought about outcomes beyond publications, and we saw that there were 6 outcomes we coded to. First of all, we looked at coding we saw that there were tools, so everything from web-based tools to patient care decision tools was an outcome that was a possibility. Designing future trials or trial protocols was also an outcome that we thought was 14%. So that was really interesting. When I was a trialist, I wish that there were this type of data around. So 14% of these were coded to trial protocols, algorithms. There's about 8%, so machine learning and AI outcomes, clinical guidelines, which of course are so important. 4% of all of these requests were coded to clinical guidelines, informing a regulatory decision, and then funding or grant applications. I'm actually surprised it's only 1%, but that's what it looks like. So I thought this was a really interesting way of actually capturing beyond our publications what other outcomes are coming out of Vivli. I think we're really proud of this, and we'll continue to do that. So our next segment is moving into talking about COVID. I thought I'd give a little bit of context for where we are for our next discussion. And clearly we saw that you all thought COVID was our top search term. That is indeed what researchers are interested in the Vivli platform. Right now we have a little over 50 studies that are listed for COVID. 12 proposals have been submitted so far, and 13 proposals have been submitted so far, 12 have been approved, with 2 publications that have emanated out of that work. We have an additional about 9 that are in draft. So we would anticipate some of those, a proportion would at least come through. And so that's really exciting. And perhaps we would see in about 15 to 18 months, some of these would come through as publications as we've seen. So I'd like to invite the COVID panel to come forward and unmute yourself and turn on your cameras. So we have Julie Hotzapfel from AZ, Steve Kern, Ben Rhodes, David Leventhal, and Becca Sudlow. So there's really been a, just to talk a bit more, there's really been a clear interest in these data for COVID based on what we're seeing in search, but we're really grateful to these members represented here, represented by entities that have been sharing or going to be sharing COVID-19 data. Industry members in the last few years have received approval for or EUA for some of these therapies. Gates supports grantees to share data through coronavirus trials through Vivli. And in a typical process, data is shared anywhere from 12 to 18 months post-regulatory approval. Clearly, there are some unique challenges we find ourselves in that could not have been foreseen even 2 years ago. We look forward to having a discussion or reflection on best practices as we're now 2 years into this pandemic. So we believe we've really assembled a unique panel and look forward to hearing from each of them on this subject. So we'll have each panelist take 3 or 4 minutes each to give the reflection on the current state of COVID data sharing, best practices, and some key learning. So we'll start off with Julie, and we'll go around. So Julie?
Hi, Rebecca, thanks. Hi, everyone. Julie Hotzapfel from AstraZeneca. So, boy, the current state of play with COVID data sharing. I know there's a lot of interest and a lot of effort that's gone into data sharing. I think the biggest data sharing that we've seen so far has largely been through work done under EMA Policy 70 and Health Canada's PRCI process. There's been an exorbitant amount of documents that has data from various data cuts that's been pushed into the public domain through those avenues. To me, what's interesting is I haven't seen much uptake on their use, and I would definitely love to be proven wrong and to see publications and some real use come from that. I know that we've put a lot of effort into thousands and thousands of pages being prepared for disclosure at different points during the process for the COVID products. I think that was one of the first places that we've seen data come through. I know that now we're seeing a lot of technical results. We're starting to see our lay summaries come through, and we're starting to get to the point in the policy perspective where these studies will qualify for requests for data sharing. And I think that's a good thing from the Vivli platform perspective. So, many of us have policies that talk about a certain period of time after studies are completed and when the products are on the market that they become eligible for research requesters. And so I think you're seeing some of that come through as well, which I think is a good thing. What's exciting to me is to think about where the research can pull some of this data together and what we can learn in the coming years reflecting back. I think a lot of the initial reaction was a bit of a scurry to try to get data out there in a lot of different ways. And I hope that as we move forward and we look at where we are today and what we can learn over the next 5 to 10 years from this data as it becomes available, we can actually start to figure out where the value comes from. What is providing the most value for data sharing, for furthering health, for learning about treatment. I think that is where we all have great opportunity as we think about data sharing through this pandemic, where it's been, where it is today, and where it's going. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that unwind over the next few years. So that's my initial thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. Steve Kern.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And thanks, Rebecca, for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to speak from my experience with the Gates Foundation, which was what I was heavily working on COVID projects during the 2020 to 2022. So one of the things that we did at the Gates Foundation was to take opportunity of the COVID crisis to change the way we had been approaching data sharing. So we've been long promoting or asking or requesting our grantees that they share the data from investments that we've made, and we've signed on to some of the international agreements from that dating back to 2017. But one of the things that we found is as we implemented it, we tend to have that conversation at the end of a grant, the end of a project, when investigators are least interested in having to think about pulling together data and sharing it and putting it somewhere. And, fair, they're ready to move on to new things, they're wrapping stuff up. And then all of a sudden we remind them of this massive task that they perceive as massive that they need to undertake. So we use COVID as an opportunity to then put the discussion at the start of the project. And by having that up in the front end, and in the conversation as we were getting projects off the ground, and then giving our grantees enabling tools and funding to actually be able to meet that requirement, it just changed the conversation dramatically. And, playing off of one thing that Julie said, we've long been requiring in grant agreements, but in all honesty, those are words, not in the agreements, they're words, and the investigators don't always know what that actually is going to mean for them when they get to actually having to do it. So we put it up on the front end. We made tools available for people, resources, individuals, R scripts, things of that sort that they could take advantage of. And importantly, we put a funding milestone on the front end. So we would start the project with a little bit of funding to get it going, but they didn't get the catalytic funding to actually execute the study until that plan was in place. And now that we have it in place, okay, we're all agreeing on what we're going to do. Let's go. And when we did that, then, it made it a lot more tenable for investigators to get involved. So the ability and the willingness to comply, just gets greater as a consequence of that. So that was on the funded side. And, on the partnered or non-funded side, we did a lot of work in partnership with pharmaceutical companies in terms of trying to synthesize information to provide insight to the general public. And I will have to say that we had a tremendous response from pharma partners, particularly driven by individual champions within companies who really wanted to help make this data, particularly for drug trials and repurposed molecules, not in new entities per se, to make it available so people could see and understand, well, what were the results saying? And so I think that individual champion was really key. That individual champion's success was determined more by the processes that already existed in their company to allow them to kind of move that data through the whole pipeline and get it out the door quicker. And we were really at this point just talking about high-level summary data, not individual level data that people could use, say, in a meta-analysis type of approach. So, I think I think having that willing partner was really key. And I'd say a lot of times there were more willing partners that were coming out of industry than were coming out of the non-industry academic world, at least in terms of this willingness to share. But it really struck to me this effort that we have to continue to push on, where we have to make this process ordinary instead of extraordinary. Right now, it's still extraordinary. And if we make it ordinary, just like you are doing now to put in the data at the end of studies within a year, that are listed in clin trials, we make the processes regular that people can know how to participate. And we just lower all those technical barriers to having people share data. Then the only ones we're left with now are willingness or unwillingness. And those are issues then we can start to address, I think, with people or individuals or organizations about why they have that unwillingness. But right now, I think people get bogged down by the technical, or they hide behind it, and then that becomes a barrier. So the more we keep pushing this in the right direction, and I know we're going to hear later from Susan Gregorick at NIH about their requirements, I think you're going to see that evolution going. And then funders who are investing in the tools to make it simple, straightforward, and even someday beneficial to those investigators, we'll take this a long way to improve the situation. So that's my opening remarks. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve, for those thoughtful reflections. Ben Rhodes, Lilly.
Hi, thanks, Rebecca, and it was great to hear from Julie and Steve. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we did, which was a little different than our normal policy. Now, first, Lilly's trials were looking at treatments for COVID as compared to prevention of COVID. So we had a conversation internally in the company to say we want to make the data available as quickly as possible, and modified our policy for this particular situation because some of the trials were looking at compounds that were already on the market, and this would be an additional use, and some of the trials were looking at new treatments. And we knew that those new treatments could potentially get out, quicker than the normal process through emergency use authorizations or, other activities around the world. So the modification was to move it to just 30 days after primary publication. We would make a list of trials available, regardless of what the approval status was of the compound. Now, sometimes the primary publication was of an ongoing trial, and so we would have to do data cuts and make just the data cuts available and anonymize the data when they were requested. We were prepared for that. We did get a lot of requests, but then there were a lot of requests that were canceled or removed. So there really weren't a lot of pull. There wasn't a lot of pull for the data yet, even though we were listing the trials and making them available. It was an interesting observation. I don't know if that was just because everybody was so worried about actually trying to treat the patients instead of doing the research, which is awesome. I'm glad that we were able to make treatment a priority. But we were able to make the data available. We also made some other changes, such as this clinical study report may not be available because that's going to take longer than 30 days after the primary publication. These publications were coming out as quick as possible as well. And then we had the other situation where not all of our trials were ones that we were running. So one of our compounds was included in an IAID trial, and that we were not the owners, the sponsors of that trial. However, those data are now available. I've gone to the NIH site and seen the trial listed. So it's good to know that those data are available as well. And I don't know if Vivli will have any conversations later on about those data being available in Vivli as well. Or can obviously be brought in by the researchers to do additional research. So that's really our big thing from a COVID perspective. Trials are still ongoing. We still have a few things that are being closed up. We're still listing new trials as they become available. But this was an internal discussion that did have agreement all the way up to the top that said we would make the data available and list the trials as quickly as possible.
Great. David Leventhal from Pfizer.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I think the prior the prior presenters, laid out, I think, what are common challenges for all of us. From a Pfizer perspective, I mean, we had everything that's just been said plus. So we had both vaccines and therapeutics. So and our vaccine was a co-development vaccine. So we had the challenge of working working with a co-development partner. We're fortunate in that we are the primary in possession of that data. So data sharing becomes less of an issue when your development partner is in possession of that data. But I think our partnership with BioNTech has been very positive, and we've been all in agreement around the importance of data sharing. I'll echo what Julie has said. There have been FOIA requests as well as Policy 43 requests that have been affecting our document disclosure part of the organization. Those have been quite challenging, just keeping up with those kinds of requests, and as well as the requests coming in from multiple sources in multiple ways. I think what we ought to be doing is making sure that Vivli is known and understood as our primary mechanism around data sharing, because I think many investigators are simply asking individual companies, hey, we want you to share data, despite the fact that we have all of this up on our websites and what our policy and practice is. There's still a tremendous demand and not always an understanding of how we work. And I think a particular challenge for Pfizer is with all of the boosters and things still under emergency use authorization, we're trying to be responsive to all the data requests that are coming in, and the landscape is changing so rapidly, and we keep continuing to do additional studies, and we want to meet our commitments of 18 months post primary completion date, and even go a little sooner. But then you run into the challenge of possibly getting out ahead of your publication policy, and we simply can't do that. So there's things that we need to manage. So it's deeply complex in our situation, but I think everyone's done really an admirable job of keeping it all together. And we're for our primary large study, vaccine study, we're preparing. Actually, the data set is already prepared and anonymized, and we're working with Vivli to make that to get that up. Those are my comments.
Thanks so much, David, and that's really wonderful news. Rebecca Sudlow?
Sure. I don't know if it's an advantage or disadvantage going last, but yeah, I kind of agree with everything everyone said before, and maybe the Roche experience is much more similar to Lily's, and that Ben described, is that we were very much playing in the space of, we had an established product that could be repurposed for the treatment of symptoms of patients hospitalized with COVID. So when we had conversations about how we wanted to build on the already sort of great foundation we had in working with the Vivli platform and the way, Vivli works in normal situations, how do we want to do things differently? And so maybe it was a slightly different conversation because the context wasn't, new vaccines, new things that the regulators hadn't seen before. So I know we worked with Rebecca and others at Vivli. We actually decided to pre-list studies before they were ready for sharing, to give researchers an opportunity, if they wanted to submit a research proposal early and do all the sort of the paperwork that was needed so they could get the data fast. We did that, but I don't think that was ever actually called on. I don't think we got any sort of advanced requests like that. And then on the Roche side, we also decided to move away from our current process, which follows the FPA Pharma principles of putting to share once EU and US approval, and actually decided to pivot it around when the clinical study report was written off, or was signed off. So that was much faster than usual. we attempted to do that. That was our best efforts, but you know, you've also got to manage the fact that the teams were very busy working. So we did post those data much earlier than planned, but you know, perhaps not quite the same day the CSR was signed off. That was perhaps a bit impractical. And our experiences so far have been, we didn't get a huge rush from the minute they were available to be requested, but since then we've had, you know, a slow and steady. I think we've received, I think, 6 research proposals so far, and we've currently got 5 studies listed. So it was an interesting experiment, and I think it's something, like you say, to reflect on what we need to be doing when we're in this situation next time. So yeah, and like I say, it's built on the foundations of the well-oiled machine that is the Vivli platform. So I'm looking forward to the rest of this panel discussion to see how we kind of move forward in the future.
Yes, thank you so much. And so for those of you that are participants, please post questions in the Q&A, and we can certainly get to them in that section. So questions that you might have for each other, and I could certainly get the ball rolling as well, is, you know, how do we prepare for the future? I think it's really admirable how all of you have stepped up during this time of pandemic. We're about 2.5 years out of this, maybe 2 years from the start of the pandemic. So reflecting back on everything that you've done, and clearly all your companies were really not focused necessarily. I mean, some of you are very focused on data share, but the primary thing was to make therapies and get them out the door, right? And data sharing, all of you have made changes in how you've done data sharing during this time. So I think it's really admirable how you've all stepped up. And I've seen also how this has changed somewhat your typical process, your way of working. So those are all admirable things. How do we move forward from here? So I'd just love to hear from you. Moving forward from here in terms of COVID data sharing and other things when we see the next, you know, major pandemic, as we probably will. How does that prepare us for the next big thing?
Well, I think I'll go ahead and start, Rebecca. I think the first thing is we hope and pray that it doesn't happen again. And I know that may be naive, but also I can look and say from a historical perspective, you know, the last pandemic wasn't in my lifetime. So I'm going to hope that another one doesn't occur in my lifetime. If for some reason that does happen, I think the research environment has shown that, you know, all parties can get behind trying to take care of, you know, these type of conditions and trying to find the information and develop products as quickly as possible, both to treat and prevent. And that's fantastic. And I'm, you know, as a parent of a child who is premature, I'm excited to see things like RSV virus that's now, you know, going to potentially have a vaccine in the future. So, you know, those type of things that have come out of this potentially are great as well. From a moving forward perspective, I don't know that we will change our policy. I think we're going to keep our policy as it is for all future products, probably because, as Rebecca said, you know, we didn't see a big pull for, you know, these data being made available so much earlier. We're going to continue to make data available, and I think you know, as we continue to see industry, I think leads that, and we want to continue to push and show that the publications that result from this can actually make a difference in patients' lives, and let that be our message. Let it be that, you know, making data available for additional research actually leads to positive outcomes for patients. When we see that, we'll continue to see more and more pull for the data and more uses. That's kind of how I want to go moving forward. And if we do see additional publications coming out of this that lead to better treatment and better research plans for the future, then that's where I would want us to push forward.
Yeah, and I would follow on with what Ben said. For us, I think it's about proactivity, and we're deeply involved in work now to make sure that part of study hygiene, that the pre-packaging and anonymization of all of our data and listing that data with Vivli is just kind of part of what it is that we do. At least at Pfizer, and I know others I think are doing a better job at this, getting out in front of the demand. So not waiting for researchers to ask for the data, to simply have that as part of our study closeout activities, package the data, make sure Vivli has it. And then, so that's one thing. And the other, and I think it's really important given everything, we've learned so much during the pandemic and, the loss of trust in institutions and vaccine hesitancy. There's, moving to Pfizer's moved to a full independent review of all research requests. And we started utilizing, Vivli's IRP this year, after not for a long period of time, and being now in alignment with the pharma, fully in alignment with the pharma and FPA principles. We think that reputationally, that's how we ought to be working. It's, and I think what is necessary it's one small thing to dispel a lot of the fears and distrust that has kind of blossomed throughout the pandemic.
Thanks, David. Ben, anyone else?
Yeah, I
So-
would just, go ahead, Julie.
I think one of the things when we think about furthering data sharing that we've been challenged with for years is standards and interoperability. And the smaller the population, the harder that is. What I think we have an interesting opportunity here, particularly, probably selfishly thinking about the vaccine space, is there's so much data out there. I think it would be interesting when the timing allows, with the different data sets, to look for opportunities to support researchers with common anonymization approaches to create interoperability, to allow true pooling of data, to learn from what happened during the pandemic. I think this is something that's generally really hard to do, having been in the details of preparing anonymized data sets and documents over the years. And as much as we've all talked about it, and we've all said, yes, there are standards out there. It's more like standard options, not standard ways of having data sets with the same age bands and the exact same ways that you could mash all the data together and actually analyze it. So I think that's probably an interesting, unique opportunity coming out of the pandemic that potentially could provide some opportunities for greater interoperability going forward. And obviously that takes, the right mindset of coming together in support of the right research to agree on ways of providing that data. But to me, it's an interesting opportunity, I think, that could come from this wealth of data that will be coming available over the next, couple years at the right timing for the different studies. Once all the follow-up data is completed, there's lots of safety following that's going on for the different vaccines, et cetera. But to me, that's something that when I just think about the large number of patients that are out there and some of the conversations we've had with the agencies when it came to documents and the anonymization and the goals and the strategies, I would love to see that happen at some point. I think it would be quite interesting from a research perspective and for us as data contributors to figure out. It just came to me when Ben was talking about sort of the future and hoping not to see this again, but thinking what could we learn and how could we further this? So sorry for cutting you off there,
Thanks.
Steve.
No, and I appreciate both yours and Ben's optimism. I tend to be a pretty optimistic person, but I can tell you in 10 years in the Gates Foundation, I worked on 3 things that we called pandemics. So I don't think this is going away. And monkeypox is a good example. And now we've got RSV. So, but the point is, I think which I appreciate is, David described how Pfizer's going from extraordinary to ordinary. And to Julie's point, trying to get even summary level values where everybody agreed what that summary value was, not easy to do. It's really hard to do in the, on your nights and weekends when you're doing it in excess to your day job. So part of what, being involved in these situations has taught me is that we can't design ideas sort of in the calm period and then put them on a shelf and then pull them out and hope that they're going to work. They won't, I can guarantee you. So part of it is understanding, continuing to exercise them and practice and think about how do we turn some of these principles into just what we do ordinarily. And if we can do that, then we'll be able to get to that point. But I love the point that Julie made early on in her opening remarks about the value. And I see there's 2 questions in the chat from Andrew Friedman and Georgie Humphreys about, how are we going to get the value of increase the secondary requests. And I think one of the things we have to do either as a funder community and maybe also as the data generator community is work together to incentivize some research to understand that value. Because what if in the end we go, what we learn is not really that helpful, then we shouldn't keep running around doing this. We should try to think about, well, what is really valuable and then how do we learn from it to help inform what we do next? And, we could do that as funders. It'd be really interesting, again, if some of the big funders would make this fundable research, because it's not generally viewed as novel, right? And so therefore it oftentimes falls to the wayside in terms of that. So I think that's going to be an effort you'll see in Gates Foundation. And then, Julie, I take good comfort in actually watching what the Odyssey Network has done, on sort of EMR type of data and clinical care data. They've been able to self-organize into a common framework. And if you look at the work that Danny Prieto Alhambra's team did at Oxford, boy, they were able to synthesize data from all over the globe really quickly. And I'd be curious to think about whether we could get to something Odyssey-like, right, in the future for the clinical studies as well.
I do think the point on value really has to be picked up, right? I look over transparency in all aspects of it at AZ, and it's a constant, how do we put it? Reach for resourcing, right? We support transparency because we believe in it. And if we know where the value comes from, we are here to better the way patients are treated and to help the world learn this. If we can figure out where the value comes from and put the resources there, you can get 2 or 3 times as more out of, say, controlled data sharing versus open data dumping. And I mean, that is my hypothesis, that we see a lot more value from the controlled, targeted scientific data sharing. But if on the flip side, we are continuing to try to make data just randomly available to anybody on the internet, from a privacy perspective, that's super hard, time consuming and cumbersome. And then from a utility use lessons learned perspective, we have not seen the uptake in that yet. And so I think if we really want as a group of stakeholders to make the most out of transparency and the wealth of information from clinical trials, it is truly about rallying around where the value comes from. And I can't stress that enough, that I would love to see a wind of change come through and really look at that from a value perspective versus a just check box exercise, which I think is happening as the call for transparency becomes more and more. I think we have to focus on the use cases. We have to focus on who really needs the access to make things valuable. It's not that everybody and their brother needs to know what happened to everybody. It's that qualified researchers need to be able to use this data effectively in an interoperable, scalable kind of way. So that's one of my big hopes that I'd love to see a shift in over the next few years.
And
Absolutely. And Go ahead, Rebecca.
Sorry, I was going to say, I don't know if this is sort of heresy talking on a call like this, but I do feel a lot of the interest was around documents and summaries, and we all get excited about data sets because of our background. And maybe there's a realization that there is a bit of a pyramid of interest, and maybe there is also a bit of a time lag. Maybe people want to get hold of the documents quicker to really understand the insights. And maybe that's why, I mean, Ben, we've seen more, it's been a slower pull of data rather than perhaps what we're expecting. So maybe also kind of realize there's different levels of interest and types of information people are after. But I also totally agree, Julie, interoperability is always going to be an issue. We have issues even with our own company, our own studies. We were, it's like even your own company trying to sometimes combine data, let alone trying to do it across organizations. So I think that's definitely something we should be looking at.
I'd love to know more about what you... Just responding to Rebecca, seeing a pull for the document, I'd love to know more about what documents and how they've been used, because I know I've been talking to folks at other companies. We're all watching to see how these documents are used. We haven't seen anything come to light. So there is the idea of just, I feel like I have the right to know everybody's business. And then there's the idea of, I want to actually do valid research to drive the world to a better place, right? So not from like a just broadcasted on CNN kind of perspective, but usage perspective. I'm truly interested if you come across some examples on that. I would love to see it, and I know through FPIA we're trying to actually do an assessment of where this value is coming from. So it'd be great input if you have any lessons to share or data points you can share from how documents that have been sought have been used. That would be really interesting to me. Sorry, Rebecca.
No, that's okay. So it sounds like, just to summarize, the policy 70 uptake has been pretty robust. But I also want to follow up with what you're saying, Julie, is the interoperability could be the barrier, because I see a question in here is, what is the value and what are the barriers? And it's perhaps the barrier is the interoperability. I mean, all of you are using CDISC format, at least for the pharma trials. And I think, lowering the barrier to access is something that Vivli is really thinking about in our next push, and how we can, I think that could be a big project for us, is how we can think about lowering that barrier to access. I mean, we do have investigators coming to us. Many of them are thought leaders in the field, but they don't have really the skills to do IPD meta-analysis. I think that's really important for them to do that. We do have a question in the Q&A that asks about, do any other organizations ask for access to data from others? Does anyone want to answer that? I think the answer is no. We haven't seen that yet.
Well,
I mean, we do actually.
I was going to say, I think we've seen
Go
a few cases of it, and it's dependent upon what the research is, and and whether it's something that's going to be perceived as a competitive interest, or if it's advancing the science, and then internally discussions that occur around that, and the age of the product, and any number of other things that go into those discussions. I think to Julie's question about the documents, I would say the only anecdote that I know is prior to Policy 70, obviously there was always a European request for information that occurred. And interestingly enough, it was pharmaceutical companies requesting other pharmaceutical companies' documents, and it didn't lead to publications. It was for internal use of freedom of information type of documents. So I would assume that that's still ongoing with Policy 70 or with Health Canada, that individual companies are going out and looking at the information, not downloading it, because the terms of use state that you can't download it unless you're going to be using it for research purposes, but anybody can view it. So that's probably what is occurring. But no, I've not seen anything from a publication of additional science.
Well, just following on Ben. You know, we are all routinely involved in consortium, you know, level data sharing. You know, whether it's through Transcelerate or through the Innovative Health Initiative in Europe, and you know, we have shared goals in you know, in those data sharing arrangements. So we're routinely doing those kinds of things, and you know, I think interoperability is a challenge, or the consortium many times asks for data that is outside or is slightly different than what we've prepared the data for Vivli. I think what we would like to see happen, certainly, you know, back to, you know, Julie's call for standards, when we do anonymization of a data set, that we would like to utilize that for our multiple engagements rather than having to go back and recreate every time we need to do that. So, I mean, again, our study hygiene, we are going to be prepackaging our data. We would like it, you know, we would like to share as widely as we reasonably can with as many as we can. But it needs to be in the format that we've elected to share it in. Otherwise, it becomes unscalable, and then you have the problem of not being able to fulfill those data requests, which is a problem. I think the one other thing, just tangential to what's already been said, I think data types is you know, is another challenge, particularly you know, for many diseases, imaging and genomics, and you know, the things that we're currently not routinely sharing through the Vivli platform are more and more being asked for, and as a operational process, we have to treat them kind of as one-offs and enter into, you know, data sharing agreements, you know, based on these data types. It would be of course wonderful if you know, if we had the ability under a common rubric to share these other, you know, images, for example, with the underlying clinical data. And then the other kinds of things that have been coming in, I think, is for, you know, observational studies and for data of which we have no control. So we often get data requests for data, you know, for observational data that is being collected by others. You know, and Pfizer is involved in that research, as we all are, but we're not the ones who are actually the data owners and don't have the ability to share that data. So I think we'd love for there to be some sort of process to be able to get to that type of observational data as well, because I think the demand for that is very high.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's something that we could certainly work on with you. Thanks, David, for your thoughts. I mean, just to get to, in the last few minutes, maybe, given how slow research culture is to change, is there thought on maybe the value not showing up for some time? So there being a time lag. It might take just a while for researchers to come around to using these resources. I mean, COVID, you know, given, you know, a lot of these requests are for oncology and diabetes, which of course has been around for, you know, forever, but COVID has just been here for 2 years. So that is one question that we have is that something that it might take some time for them to come around to using these resources?
I think that's where we have to put the incentives to really accelerate that understanding, back to the earlier point about what's the value, you know, in doing this. So I think we need to step that up as generators of the data, funders of the data, and do that collectively. But I'd also argue that you need to then change the mindset of the publishers of the results, because, you know, I think we've had funded a pretty good effort of some really top tier statistical people to do summary meta-analysis of trials that Naveen Zarifa led, with many people from many of these companies and very high qualified statisticians. And despite that, it's not getting taken up by the publishing. You know, the publishers have COVID fatigue right now, basically. And so the idea of, you know, oh, a summary, we're not even interested in that, right? So all of that really gets in the way of trying to really advance this as a science. But I think it's a key component, because my hunch is similar to what, you know, Rebecca and Julie are saying. It's an 80-20 situation. But I bet 80% of the things we really care about, we can answer with pretty high level summary data. And only 20% really need to dig down to the individual subject level. And if we tiered it that way and found a way to do that, I think you'd get huge value that would come out of this. But that's a hypothesis to be proven.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for your thoughtful reflections. This has been, I've learned so much during this panel and really advanced the conversation forward. I'd like to invite Dr. Susan Gregorek for the next segment on the NIH data sharing initiative that will be starting up in January. So Susan, invite you to share your slides and unmute yourself, and thanks for our previous panel.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was a great panel. Am I sharing my slides, or are you sharing them and I'm remotely working them? I can do either way. Just let me know.
You should.
Yeah, I believe we're sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
No,
have to-
we're sharing and you can.
Okay, that sounds great.
Susan, you should now be able to see the slides and control the move forward with your presentation.
I don't see them yet, but it may be just slow. Maybe I'm supposed to click on something. No. Okay, so I see the Vivli slide still. Now I see my slide. Okay. Okay, so let me see if I can get this to work. I'm Susan Gregorek, Associate Director for Data Science. It's really great to be here today. I thoroughly enjoyed the previous panel. It was an incredibly thoughtful discussion. And since I'm new to controlling the panel remotely, if there's any delay, I apologize sincerely. So we are really living in some interesting times where data sharing is a priority. It's not just a priority of NIH and our agency, but it's also a priority of the administration and of President Biden. We all recognize that scientific data serve as catalysts for every biomedical breakthrough and every new treatment reaching patients. Sharing scientific data does require us to really prospectively think about and plan for the data that will be shared at the onset of our research. And this might be for some of us a new paradigm. I'm sure that you've heard of all of the various OSTP memos, the memo from August 25th, where OSTP issued guidance on making federally funded research data, research products actually freely available without delay. This memo directs agencies to update their public access policies as soon as possible to make publications and research funded by US taxpayers publicly accessible without an embargo or without cost. And so all of the agencies are looking at ways that we can implement this policy, including ending the optional 12-month embargo that we might currently have. And we need to do so no later than December 31st of 2025. So we are actively discussing and working on our plans for complying with this policy in this memo. You may also be aware of the May 26th memo from OSTP, which issued guidance on ensuring that federally funded research data are equitably benefiting all of Americans. This guidance contains clearly definable characteristics for two classes of online data resource repositories, a general class that's appropriate for all funded repositories, including free and easy access to those repositories, and then a second, more specific class of repositories, which has very special considerations for the sharing of human data including additional considerations for data security and privacy considerations. This is the OSTP memo for desired characteristics data repositories. I'll be mentioning this throughout my talk. It's worth looking at that. I've seen some really nice tweets recently about these characteristics for desired repositories. We are working to comply with this memo. And these memos point to trends in the administration that support equitable access of data and support the results of research publications to the scientific community in a timely fashion with unfettered access. So, sorry about that. Shoot. Hang on, let me see if I can go back. Oh no, I'm not able to go back. Okay, I will just speak. Okay, thank you. It's a little tricky to do this, I have to say. Okay, so from NIH's perspective, data sharing is important for many reasons, probably for the same reasons that you feel as well. It sparks new research collaborations. It enhances rigor and reproducibility of studies. It enables unique data combinations for further research and secondary research. It facilitates reproducibility. Maximizing our collection and fostering stewardship and advancing our enterprise are what we hope to get out of the advances that we'll be putting forward in our data management and sharing policy. Okay, so this is sort of the timeline, the long arc of starting to develop a policy internally at NIH, starting back as early as 2016, and then all the ways in which we received guidance from the community about the policy until the final effective date. And if I click here, you should see some of the ways in which we engaged the community. We did so through tribal consultations for specific considerations for sharing tribal data. We worked with our data science policy councils and our working groups. We held a number of engagement strategies and RFIs with the community. We briefed the community through the associate of the advisory council to the director. We worked with the White House Open Science Subcommittee on Open Science, and then the secretary of HHS's Advisory Committee for Human Research Protections. So I want to point, in conjunction with the policy and the development of the policy, we worked with the National Academies on a workshop for the changing the culture of data management and data sharing. I just want to highlight this. I want to tell you some of the observations and findings that the community told us through this workshop, and then some of their recommendations, because these are informing how we implement the policy. The findings from the workshop included the fact that implementing this would really require a system-wide culture change. We needed to, they told us, align incentives for resources and the community, including all of our biomedical stakeholders. That could be other funders like NSF or DOE, institutions that may in fact stand up new resources to support this policy, publishers of journals, data repositories that will hold the data, including our Genos repositories in Vivli, and other associations. And they told us that impactful data really relies on the successful implementation. Oh, should I stop and get questions or wait to the end? Maybe wait to the end, but thanks, I note that there's a question. Okay, requires successful implementation of the policy. So data management practices do need to be mindful of secondary data users and being mindful of that at the start of the experiment when you're creating the data and the metadata. And good management practices ensures that there is the accompanying metadata that really will support secondary data reuse, and that we do need to pay attention to the research lifecycle and the data lifecycle itself. And so these are the foundations of good data sharing, as well as QA, QC, and versioning, of course. So some of the recommendations included engaging stakeholders across the research enterprise, developing metrics for the evaluation of the policy. We are actually now in the process of developing those metrics. It's going to be an iterative process. I'm sure that we'll learn a lot from our first set of metrics, and then we'll continue to iterate through the long tail of this implementation of the policy. They recommended that we incentivize adoption of persistent unique identifiers. We completely agree. You'll see some of the activities we're doing to support that. And that we promote data citation, even though citation standards may still be evolving, that we do encourage the promotion of data citation. And of course, that sounds like a good recommendation. And that they recommended that we harmonize our data sharing expectations and promote the alignment of different data management and sharing policies, incentives, resources, and training. And so you'll see some of that as well. So this is a really impactful workshop. It's worth looking at the report if you're interested. So, I know that we all are aware that the policy will be in effect on January 25th. That's just literally 2 months away, and that researchers who are submitting applications for NIH funding will need to prospectively plan for their data sharing by submitting their plan at the time of application. And you're going to see that this is a pretty broad policy. I'm going to speak a lot about it, and most of these slides that I'll share are actually slides from the Office of Science Policy and the Office of Extramural Research. I partner with them, and you'll see some of the work we're doing to support the policy. So first, the policy expectations that data sharing should be the default and it should be maximized to the extent possible. However, we do know that not all data can or will be shared. And so when you're developing your policy, tell us about the limitations for the sharing of those data. They could be technical limitations, they could be ethical limitations, they could be legal factors. We just need to know that you outline which data will be shared and which data will not be shared and why. Consider outlining the protection of privacy for citizens, their rights and confidentiality, and of course, we'll all abide by the laws and policies. So we really want people to think about planning for data sharing throughout the research process and life cycle. So the data management and sharing policy applies to all research that is generating scientific data, including research projects. Those are the R's, the P's, the U, grant mechanisms. Some scientific career development awards, the K's, for example, the SBIR, STTR with considerations, again, for data sharing and research centers. What doesn't the policy apply to? The training grants, the T's, the fellowships, the F's, construction grants, conference grants, resource grants, and any sort of research-related infrastructure program. So all the big instrument programs, for example. So it's pretty comprehensive. By the way, it applies to the OTAs, the contracts, and the intramural research that we fund as well. So it is a comprehensive policy. So some key parameters when thinking about developing your data management and sharing plan. We believe that, all data should be managed in your laboratory. That does not necessarily mean that all data needs to be shared. However, we anticipate that you will be sharing the scientific data that is of sufficient quality and validity to reproduce or replicate research findings. So what is not in that plan is your laboratory notebooks, any preliminary analysis, the case report forms, physical objects. Preliminary data is not something that you would or need to share. When should you share the data? Well, most researchers share the data at the time of publication. That makes a lot of sense. It makes the findings reproducible or at least replicatable. Or if there is not a publication for those data at the time of your award, that is the last drop dead date that you would be sharing your data. Of course, we hope that you will share your data in a timely fashion that makes sense for your research. You do want to consider how long the data should be shared and what particular policies the journals that you're publishing in may have, or the repositories themselves that you're going to be sharing your data, what policies do they have? So there are a lot of things to consider, and this is a broad-reaching policy. A lot of folks ask, and it's quite appropriate, is how is this going to be evaluated? And so the plans will be submitted with your application. You will be presenting a budget justification. You are allowed to put in costs for the data management and sharing that you'll be doing. that will be reviewed by your committee, your review committee, but it will not be scored. They may make comments, but they will not score it. NIH will assess the plans and make decisions about your data management sharing plans. They may ask you to revise your plans. They may not, but those plans will become part of your terms and conditions of your award, and they may be monitored at regular, periodic, yearly RPPR submissions for your grant mechanism. And so we will take this very seriously. We are putting in place the necessary infrastructure at NIH to support the compliance and monitoring of data management sharing plans. It's going to take a little while, but we will be doing that. So we've hosted a number of webinars and trainings, and those will continue to go forward. I'll put a slide up at the end where you will be able to see all of the information on how you can get access to it, just to let you know that we have on a regular basis been working with the community on the data management sharing plans, and we've had a number of really great webinars, and these are all recorded and on the website that I'll show you. So I want to point out some recently issued guidance and instructions or resources. If you have the ability to have my slides, these are hyperlinks. Two important new things that just recently came out is the responsible management of sharing American Indian and Alaska Native participant data. I hope that you will look at that when you're developing your data management sharing plans. It's a really important notice, as well as the supplemental information for protecting privacy when sharing human research participant data. We get a lot of questions on this, and so I hope that you will also look at those two new notices that just recently came out. So there is quite, thank you for putting that in the link. Really appreciate that. There is quite a lot to consider when developing a data management sharing plan through the sort of data flow all the way from collection, annotation and curation, the sharing of the data, the storage of the data, and then, the long tail of archiving and accession. So what needs to go in your plan? When you're thinking about developing your plan, these are our recommended elements. Your IC that you're getting funding from may have additional recommendations. They may have a template that you're supposed to use. ICs will be implementing this policy according to their missions and their needs. However, we all agree that we do want to know the data types that you do intend to preserve and share, any related tools or software or code that are necessary to manipulate the data in a replicable way. Importantly, the standards, the metadata, the common data elements, the common data models that you're going to be using. We strongly encourage you to use community standards, and particularly attaching your metadata with your data when you do share it. We want you to think about the access and timeline of data preservation. Which repository do you intend to use? We encourage you to use persistent unique identifiers. We hope that you will consider doing so. And then, of course, other factors for data access, such as controlled access data, distribution or reuse of that data, and then your overall data management inside your laboratory. So we do encourage you to look at established repositories. I'll have some more to say about all of the different ways in which you can share data. I do want to make a note that ICs may have very specific data repositories which they want you to share your data in. I'll give you an example. Researchers who are working in the cranial, facial, and dental research field may be asked to share their data in FaceSpace. That's the IC is supporting FaceSpace for their researchers. It is a designated repository for their researchers. And so you may be told where to share your data, but that may be a very specific program or IC related decision. In general, we recognize that there is not going to be a one-size-all-fits solution to data management and data sharing. Research across the biomedical enterprise has really very different expectations and experiences and needs for data sharing. What a synthetic organic chemist would do and share is going to be vastly different from what a clinician or a clinical informaticist would be thinking about in data sharing. Researchers have many options, so let's just talk briefly about some of these, and then I'll do a deep dive into a few. For example, researchers can choose to share their data as part of their supplemental materials that are associated with their publications, and they can do this via PubMed Central. It's attached to the publication as a supplement. Through our partnership with AWS, Google, and Microsoft Azure, but in particular AWS and the STRIDES program, we are sharing all of that data in PubMed Central through the Open Data Sponsorship Program, the ODP. This data can be found. It's not a deep search, I have to say. It's a pretty lightweight search, but you can find it, you can cite it, and you can use it in your research. Investigators may choose to share data and other digital materials from their research efforts in a number of journals repositories like Vivli, and we'll talk about this in a minute. NIH also supports the sharing of data in our cloud service providers through STRIDES with either AWS, Google, or Microsoft Azure. Data can be stored there and made accessible. Currently, we store and share over 200 petabytes of biomedical data in the cloud. That there are some caveats. There's no overreaching search across the cloud for data. You really have to know which program and how it's going to be shared, and there's a bit of a heavy lift there. So it is possible, but it is not always completely straightforward. So we recognize that databases, data repositories come in various sizes, complexities, and levels of maturity. Each has a potential to bring value to a research community, but at the very different stages, from really early onset to extreme maturity, they have developed appropriate practices in ways in which they can manage and make their data ingested and available. So we want to make sure that we support repositories to align to the OSTP desired characteristics of a data repository, that they do support fair data, and that they support the trust principles. And just very briefly, you can see them outlined here, but trust is transparency of function, responsibility for data stewardship, user-focused and community-driven capabilities, sustainability to ensure that the data is uninterrupted access for researchers, that there is an attention to technologies. Those are the trust principles. So in the last 2 years, NIH has been preparing our already funded repositories to align to those characteristics, to adopt trust principles, to adopt fair principles in ways that make sense for them. So you can see the number of awards that we've made, 21 so far in the focal areas. What are researchers doing to support the sharing of data? They're supporting ways in which they can create stronger automated annotation for metadata. They're looking at imputing missing metadata and data. They're looking at porting and moving databases and resources to the cloud, and enhancing rigor and reproducibility. NIH also supports programs for funding new and existing data repositories and knowledge bases as biomedical data resources. So not as part of an R01 mechanism, but as part of an R and a U mechanism. These are supported by particular funding announcements. They're linked there at the bottom of the page. And there's a special emphasis panel overseen by the Center for Scientific Review. So the program requires that data repositories and knowledge base applicants would support an NIH institute or a series of institutes' missions and goals, and that these repositories demonstrate scientific impact in those communities. We hope that applicants will address the quality of data services and address methods that do increase efficiency of operation. That could be automating curation, curation that has automation for QA/QC, or leveraging new technologies and capabilities. We also hope that applicants will articulate strategies to engage with their targeted scientific communities with training and outreach, and with the scientific journals that align with those focal areas, and that applicants will support and establish transparent governance with scientific advisory boards, for example, and that they will support good data and management practices and data lifecycle practices, and in the development of metrics for use and usability. You can see on the side there a number of the repositories that we have been awarded through this program. Many of these are probably well known to you. A few of them are funded across NIH. They're sort of like core biomedical resources. There's also some really great opportunities to work with generalist repositories, which offer additional capabilities to share data and scientific digital projects that are a result of our research. So early this year, NIH launched a new program. It's the Generalist Repositories Ecosystem Initiative, and it supports a collaboration between the 7 generalist repositories, including Vivli, which we're so happy to work with, seen here at the bottom. What do we hope to get out of this initiative? We hope to make it just easier for researchers to find and share data. We want to improve the discoverability of the NIH-supported data that we have funded across these repositories. So these repositories are blazing trail for us. Of course, we want to enhance the rigor and reproducibility of scientific initiatives and develop some core and shareable metrics that across these repositories. And we want to encourage the reuse of data that are stored in these repositories. This could include training and engagement with the research community. The research community does need to understand more about the importance and practices of data sharing. So these are just some, in a really nice graphical way of thinking about some of the key activities that are happening within this initiative. Developing consistent metadata models when possible across these repositories. Supporting data discovery is an important part of this initiative, and it's going to be trailblazing for what we might do in the future at a larger scale. Same with developing open and shareable metrics. And supporting use cases and educational material. Again, research community needs to know and understand how to make data fair and shareable, and then how to reuse it in a sustained way. We want to engage with the research community. We want to develop new data sharing capabilities based on what we hear from workshops. And we are just absolutely thrilled to be working with the community and Vivli on this initiative. But wait, there's more. We want to support the longer term provenance, the findability, and the citability of data. So we have partnered with DataCite. We are a consortium member. This affords us some really great opportunities. So we will support all of the NIH institutes. We will offer the ability to have their repositories work with DataCite to provide persistent identifiers for research products. These could be data. They could also be software. They could be reports. We're also supporting essentially a coordination technical and administrative center for our repositories to work with DataCite and the data fabric. So that we can lower the barrier to working with DataCite and create much more of a community that embraces the use of persistent unique identifiers. I really want to encourage the community to really seriously think about using unique identifiers for their data, and then linking those with the ORCID IDs. This benefits everybody. You can see the trail of citation of your data and the impact that it has. We can understand the impact of our data management and sharing policy. So I think this would be something to really consider. There are other things to consider besides best practices for data sharing. Also, best practices for software sharing. We recently published on our web a best practices site. It aligns very closely with the FAIR for Research software initiative. At a high level, what we want to do is to provide guidance on the use of software in research and medical and clinical settings. We want to discuss the ways in which software can also have metadata and what might be reasonable metadata for software. This is something the community could certainly discuss. We want to make sure that software is citable and that there is a best practices for developing code. This does align as well with our strategic plan for data science, and it aligns very well with what we see happening in the community for FAIR for Research software. I know our time is getting towards the end, so I just want to give you a few sort of FYIs. This is probably the most important slide here. How do you get the resources to understand what NIH is doing for the data management sharing policy? Please visit sharing.nih.gov. You can see the latest updates, all of the opportunities we have in webinars, all of the new notices coming out with new guidance and policies. We link to the BMIC website that tells you which repositories NIH is funding. Actually, it includes even beyond NIH funded repositories, how you can access the data, how you can input the data for sharing, what their guidelines are. It includes all the generalist repositories as well. It's amazing site. So this is probably, today my most important slide. And here's my second most important slide. Please join Vivli, NIH, and all of our generalist repositories in the GRAY Collaborative webinar. This is a way for you to learn more about what we're doing in the GRAY, about the resources that are offered by the generalist repositories, and some of the best practices that they can provide for sharing NIH-funded data. The next webinar is going to be next week on the 10th. I hope that you'll join us. We've been having great conversations, and the webinars have been fantastic thus far. And lastly, if you're interested in ways in which NIH institutes are sharing data, each month we host a data sharing and reuse seminar series on the second Friday at noon. We hear from an institute and one of their funded PIs on ways in which they're making data available to their research communities. So you'll just see a few of our speakers, Karen on Databrary, really great way of sharing video interactions of mothers and children. Pruvish Katari, who considers himself a bona fide data parasite, and he's got some really great ways of munging together open access data to advance clinical and translational diseases. And then Alexander Roblinsky, who is the PI behind the Brain Image Library. And with that, I am just right at time, hopefully. So sharing data is important. It's a catalyst for all of us. Integrating our policies, our resources, and our infrastructure is key to what NIH is doing. I hope I've presented somewhat of a coherent picture of how we are doing it. We want to promote effective data sharing, not as the rule, not as the exception. And with that, I am happy to pass it back to the organizers. I think we perhaps have time for Q&A, or maybe, oh
Yes,
no, we have Dave
of course.
Jones. Okay.
No, we do have time for questions. So if you have any other questions for you, Susan, please put them in the Q&A. But thank you so much for your talk. It was very clear and about the policy and what needs to be done, and certainly look forward to having data reused by NIH investigators in the future, and more of this data flowing in January and years to come, of course. We do have a question coming in, is that now that we can share the slides, can others reuse them to help be ambassadors for this new DMS policy at their own institutions?
That's a great question, Lena. So if you don't mind, because I cribbed the first half of my talk from my colleagues from OSP and OER, I'm going to ask them if they don't mind, but my slides you are free to use. So mine start at the data flow. All the infrastructure is me, all the policy is them. So I will, if you don't mind, I will ask them, and I suspect they will say that's fine, but let me just double check on that.
Okay, so we'll circle back. We have another question about the issues of IP protection and data sharing requirements.
We will be, that is a super great question. So I have to get a clarifying now. Are you asking about protections for sensitive data and controlled access data, or are you asking about SBIR IP legal? So I can't tell from your question which way I should go here. If you could just let me know which, I think it might be a small business.
Yeah, so if the person could clarify, you know, I guess they're probably speaking about the data use agreement. It would be my guess.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Asking about IP for patent protection and future
patent
discovery.
Protection. Yes. Okay, that is a great yes. I that's what I thought. So you can stipulate, and this we have been doing this currently in some of our programs, you can stipulate in your data management sharing plan that this data will not be shared initially because of IP considerations. And then I think you have a number of years before you actually have to share that data. And that number of years may be on the order of 20. I have to go back and check for sure, but I know that there is considerations for holding data due to IP and patent. And it is a legal process, and I think it's 20 years.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Susan, for your talk. Very informative, as always. Okay, terrific. So I think we're going to switch gears a bit and talk about two very different data challenges, both of which we are collaborating on. one that's just in flight in September that we're collaborating with the Helmsley Charitable Trust, and one that will be launching shortly with ADDI. So I'll introduce Denise Dalton from Helmsley Charitable Trust, who will be talking about our initiative in type 1 diabetes. So I turn it over to Denise.
And I invite everybody to turn on your videos. I want to start with a little recall. Think about the last time you exercised. Maybe it was in the morning, you got up at 7 o'clock, got a cup of coffee, and you wanted to get a 45-minute run in the park before your workday starts at 9 or kids wake up. And it's great. You got your run in and had a very healthy, good start to your day. Now imagine you're a person living with type 1 diabetes. You also enjoy a morning run. You got up at 7, got a cup of coffee, and right before you go out the door, you check out your glucose from your continuous glucose monitor. And you realize on that day, it's 70 milligram per deciliter, and it's going down. That means going out for a run without treating your glucose can be dangerous. You could go unconscious in the middle of your run. So you drink juice, wait 15 minutes to see its impact on your glucose. You look at your glucose meter. Then if it's not higher, you repeat the course again. Maybe you eat a glucose tablet or a power bar until your glucose is 100 milligram per deciliter. Going steady, you are not able to go out for a run. And by the time you're able to manage your diabetes and the time that you had for the run, you probably can't go for a run anymore because it's your work day or your kids woke up. This is not an unusual scenario for people with type 1 diabetes. They have to use trial and error method each time they exercise with this condition, because exercise also can impact glucose levels up or down. You could go hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia, depending on the time, the intensity of the exercise, or the type of the exercise. All this trial and error method should not fall on the shoulders of people living with type 1 diabetes. It's not just unfair, it's unsafe. That's why Helmsley embarked on type 1 diabetes exercise initiative, and that's what brings me here today to this meeting. I'm Denise Dalton. I'm a program officer at Helmsley Charitable Trust, and we're ready to pull up my slides. Thank you. And I think I'm able to control them. Helmsley's mission is helping people live better lives, no matter where they call home. And Helmsley has 6 programs, and one of the 6 programs is type 1 diabetes. And type 1 diabetes program's mission is changing the trajectory of type 1 diabetes and improving the lives of people living with this condition. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition where pancreas doesn't produce insulin. So you have to give yourself insulin throughout the day, every day, for the rest of your life. There is no cure for type 1 diabetes, but people use a lot of tools to help manage this condition. For example, continuous glucose monitors or insulin pumps or automated insulin delivery systems, also known as artificial pancreas systems. But no tool is perfect. Going back to my opening story, exercise is one of the activities that people with type 1 diabetes have to manage in addition to meals, stress, sleep. It is not an easy condition, and people are asked by their providers to exercise 150 minutes a week to lead a healthy life. But clinical guidelines are all based on smaller studies that are in controlled environments. And with T1-DEXI data, we hope to change that paradigm. T1-DEXI data is an observational trial data that actually reflects the real world conditions for people living with type 1 diabetes and exercising in real world. T1 DEXA data is at Vivli to be used in new ways, leading to new discoveries. Next slide. Helmsley embarked on this initiative about 6 years ago. And with Jabe, who is the owner of this data set, and with a number of T1 type 1 diabetes experts. And in the past 6 years, there was a lot of planning, piloting, and collecting real-world data from 500 adults living with type 1 diabetes and 250 pediatric people with type 1 diabetes. This is a very unique and one-of-a-kind data set because one, it's a large data set, and it is observational. It is real-world conditions. So just to give you a sense of the data, how large it could be, is continuous glucose monitors report data from your glucose every 5 minutes. And 500 adults wore this device 24/7 for a month. So you can imagine those glucose data sets in that month. And in addition to insulin, heart rate, activity, and sleep and stress information, as well as genetics. Another aspect of this data set that makes it so unique, Jabe has gone to the entire United States via social media to recruit for this study. Uniquely, we did not recruit from type 1 diabetes or diabetes clinics. The study participants came from all across the United States. And third, this study actually was conducted during the global pandemic. Serendipitously, the Jabe team had planned and prepared a study protocol that could be led during the middle of a global pandemic where no one can go to a care setting or a clinic setting. All the tools, all the devices were shipped home. All the clinical interviews were done via video, and all the data was collected observationally. And the videos, the exercise videos that people were asked to perform were validated home exercises, aerobic, high intensity interval, and resistance, for us to be able to see the different responses of glucose for different types of exercise. I know you're all here because you care about data. You believe in the power of data. Type 1 diabetes is a chronic condition that is managed by data and insulin. That's why this is such a big opportunity for the attendees of this call, for the audience of this data set, to give the data set new lives and for it to live beyond the Jabes and the Helmsleys and the type 1 diabetes experts that has laid eyes on this data. T1D DEXA data set is at Vivli to be able to use in new ways, to leading to new discoveries. Helmsley chose Vivli as its data sharing platform because Vivli's mission of advancing science via clinical trial data aligns with Helmsley's data sharing vision, which is making the most out of our participants' contributions. And in this case, it's literally blood and sweat of people living with type 1 diabetes. Previous panelists also talked about the FAIR and the trust and the data standards and the importance of using them. I cannot applaud the Jabe team's efforts in mapping this observational trial data to CDISC standards as part of this effort so that this data set can be interoperable, can be combined with other data sets that has the data standards in order to get new insights and new eyes and innovation to this field. Another reason why the Vivli platform was so attractive for Helmsley to post this data, because we want this data to go beyond the type 1 diabetes experts. We need a lot of type 1 diabetes experts to look at this data, but we also need data scientists. We also need algorithm makers. We also need decision support systems. That's why it is so important that this data set goes beyond our borders. And in addition to making this data set publicly available, Helmsley took one more step to launch a unique RFP. Next slide, please. The reason why this is a unique RFP, because we are asking the researchers not just to publish from existing data, but to go one step above that. We're asking researchers to look at the observational trial data, T1D DEXA data, identify the real world gaps and problems, find solutions, and then test those solutions with people with type 1 diabetes. This is also a unique RFP because of the timing. As Rebecca mentioned, we made this data available in September recently, and we are asking for concepts in April 2023. And then we hope to make decisions July 2023 and hope to give out the awards in the fall of 2023. We hope that this will allow the researchers to get access to the data, to explore the data, and really identify what problem that they're solving for, and develop the solutions together as well as then testing the solution. It took 6 years to get here to this point, and we expect that it's going to take another 3 to 6 years to get to solutions. But this is the time to invest in interventions, because 6 years ago, we knew that we didn't have the right data and the real world data to base our solutions on. And now we do. Remember the trial and error method that people with type 1 diabetes use to manage exercise with this condition? We tried to take the trial part out of that, and we hope that the researchers will help us take the error part, and we can lead to solutions so that people with type 1 diabetes can exercise routinely and safely. The reason we posted type 1 diabetes DEXA data to Vivli is so that it can be used in new ways, leading to new discoveries. I encourage all members of this call to share the word that this T1 DEXA data is at Vivli, and it is available for public researchers, and it is available for also, if you're interested in RFPs, that would be a great opportunity to spread the word. I also ask the pharma members on the call to use this data to improve existing technologies, devices, and therapies. And I also ask whomever is interested in solving real world problems, T1 DEXA is an opportunity, because we're all here to solve problems, big problems. And I hope that you see this RFP and the public data set as an opportunity to make a difference and make an impact. I want to close with a quote that we're all inspired by Bill Gates. Power comes not from knowledge kept, but from knowledge shared. Let's share the power. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denise. Very inspiring. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Tetsu Maruyama from ADDI to talk about the ADDI Alzheimer's Data Challenge that we'll be launching shortly.
Thanks
We
very
will
much.
be taking questions after Tetsu's talk on both data challenges. So if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A section. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. ADDI has been partnering with Vivli for over a year now to work for enhancing interoperability and accessibility of data around Alzheimer's disease, one of the biggest challenges that faces the world really today. I want to talk a little bit about our data challenges, which is going to echo some of what you've heard from Denise, but also a different structure really. I want to start just by telling you what ADDI is. If you're here, you know who Vivli are, but let's just take a minute or two to talk about who ADDI as a Vivli partner are. As an overview, we're a nonprofit organization. We were created in order to overcome some of the challenges that we see in sharing Alzheimer's data. And we have a mission to transform Alzheimer's disease research, accelerating progress towards new treatments and cures. Now, as a data sharing organization, we don't do the research ourselves. We don't collect the data, but our intention is to be the link between people who have data that could make a difference and researchers, wherever they might be and whatever their backgrounds might be, who can answer questions and move the Alzheimer's field forward. Well, what we recognized from the start is that sharing data is about building a community. And I've put this slide in here. It outlines a number of terms and approaches here that I think probably people on this meeting are even more familiar with than I am. So I don't really want to go into a huge amount of detail about this, but just to say there really were, when ADDI was founded by a consortium of organizations, including the CPATH Institute, including the Alzheimer's Association and their GAIN, Global Alzheimer's Association Interactive Network Sharing, Alzheimer's Research, Dementia Platforms UK, also Alzheimer's Research UK, really global organizations that wanted to make sure that more data around Alzheimer's disease was more available to more people. And there were kind of three pillars to the way that data sharing had to happen. We wanted to increase interoperability because there's a lot of great data out there already, but it can be difficult to get at it, and it can, you can have to do it piece by piece if you want to assemble a larger data set than might be available through any one organization. So interoperability of the existing platforms, we wanted to encourage more people who haven't yet shared their data to do so. And of course, we want to encourage people to make use of those data. So we focused on the interoperability of the existing platforms. We provide free data hosting for people who need it to increase data discovery and streamline the data access requests. We provide, again, free of charge private workspaces for essentially anybody who asks for it, any legitimate interest in Alzheimer's disease. And the use of those free cloud-based storage compute comes along with the ability to quality control data, to harmonize data, which clearly is a big problem everyone who wants to make use of shared data needs to overcome, analyze, save data, and collaborate. So if you have been permissioned a workspace, you can invite collaborators. It could be in your lab, it could be in your institution, it could be anywhere in the world, in order to work together, again, building community here. We recognize the community needs a place to meet, and so we've recently launched AD Connect, which consists of community forum, knowledge sharing, which could be about technical resources, about understanding the best ways to make use of ADDI's offerings, and also to help facilitate data challenges, which is what I want to talk about a little bit now. Before talking about the challenges that we've done and the challenges that we're going to do, just to go back a little bit to some of the discussions that have been running through the panels and presentations today, which is, making data available for sharing has been challenging, but that challenge is starting to yield, I think, and more data are becoming available. More and more organizations and individuals recognize the value of sharing the data. But what we haven't really seen yet is the uptake of those data. people making use of data that's available for sharing. And of course, sharing data in and of itself is very nice, but it's not what we do it for. We do it so that people can use those data in order to make breakthroughs that they couldn't have done without looking at human data, without looking at high quality data, without bringing data sets together, without novel analysis tools. And I think that what we've discovered in a couple of years is that, like anything else, the decision to share data or the decision to make use of the shared data represents a cost-benefit calculation on the part of people who want to do it. If it's really difficult to make use of the data, if the permissioning process is hard, if you have to go to 18 different places, if you have to do all the data harmonization yourself, well, you might do that if you thought there was a really good reason for doing it. If investing the time and effort into doing that was going to get you the kind of rewards that you expected for putting that time in, which may mean publication, it may mean visibility, it may, if you're working in industry, it may be about convincing decision makers to progress your project because you now have better scientific justification. Whatever it is, we feel it's important at this stage in our encouraging of data sharing to create exemplars, to show people that if you make use of shared data, there are discoveries to be made, and those discoveries will be embraced by the community and move the field forward. And data science challenges are not the only way that you can do that, but they are one appropriate way to do so. ADDI has run 2 data science challenges in the past. In our first year, we ran originally titled ADDI Alzheimer's Detection Challenge. And really the key goal of that particular challenge was to make people aware of ADDI. It was started several months after we had officially launched in November of 2020. We had a data set related to the well-known clock drawing test, which is a test of cognitive function highly associated with development of Alzheimer's disease. We opened it up to everybody in the world. We had tens of thousands of participants in this, we considered it a success in that we brought people in from all over the world to take part in this challenge. Largely, we think for the cash prizes, the PlayStations, the drones, etc., that we gave away with it. This year, we did a different kind of data science challenge. We ran a hackathon in collaboration with a number of our partners, but principally with Roche Diagnostics. And a big reason for running this challenge was to bring people's attention to a new tool that we've added to ADDI through Roche, which is the Neuro Toolkit. And this is a package that includes tools for data harmonization, data analysis, data display, and largely around biomarker data, which was the principal interest of Roche. Here we use the EPAD, the European Prevention of Alzheimer's Disease data set, which is available on the AD Workbench, ADDI's data sharing tool, and invited participants to form teams which would represent some of the skills we thought would be required to address the challenge. Oh dear. Somebody says the slides don't seem to be changing. They are on my screen. So the slide that I'm talking through has a picture of the AD detection challenge and the Neuro Toolkit. I do apologize if you can't see them. I'm not sure why, but I'll try to talk through without the slides if that has to happen. And I'm going to actually get to the punchline here quickly anyway. So we ran the Neuro Toolkit data hackathon. This summer, we wanted the announcement of the winners and the presentation of videos by the winners to happen at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference that was held last July. And again, we were pleased with the response. We had over 40 teams that participated in this, that worked on a challenge where we'd ask them to use the EPAD data set to address some of the key diagnostic criteria for Alzheimer's disease. And at least one of the teams came up with a unique finding that is currently being prepared for publication. So this was considered a good result, but not fully the result that we wanted, which is to really engage a broader community in identifying novel problems that are at the core of what we need to discover about Alzheimer's disease. So in introducing the Vivli ADDI challenge, sorry, I'll get that right, the Vivli ADDI challenge that, as Rebecca said, is in planning stages right now, and we hope to launch early next year. I wanted to just draw a comparison between the previous challenges and this one to kind of highlight what we've learned about it and what we think is going to be required for these challenges to really make a difference. Thank you for that. Glad to know my simple slides can be seen. So in the previous challenges, for instance, in the case of the ADDI Data Science Challenge, we opened this to just anyone because the idea was to bring new ideas and new people to the AD workbench and to understand the opportunities that are involved there. Or for the NTK hackathon, it was, teams with these minimum required capabilities, a statistician, a data scientist, a neuroscientist, but other than that, completely unrestricted. For the Vivli ADDI challenge, it's going to be more like an RFP, and we're going to ask for applications to bring novel ideas and employ a panel of expert judges that are going to take a very wide initial range. Anyone is invited to submit an application, but then focus on those that an expert panel believe are the most likely to be addressing key questions that existing data sets can answer. In the previous challenge, we limited participants to a narrow scientific question. In the first challenge, it was, can you come up with an algorithm that will predict Alzheimer's disease diagnosis on the basis of clock drawing, which we kind of knew already anyway, but it was useful to see how the data could be used. Here, we're going to ask applicants to give their own topics, to suggest their own topics, although we are also going to give a list of suggested topics that have been brought to us by experts in the field who are working with us. Data sets were available only on ADDI's AD Workbench. Actually, the first challenge was run off publicly available data. The NTK challenge, as I mentioned, was run with the EPAD data set. Here we want to work with data sets that are available on the workbench, but also obviously are Vivli contributors. And we like to make that as broad as possible. One of the key features was that contestants had a limited period of time. We thought it would be great to do a hackathon, and so we gave teams 2 weeks to do this. And in retrospect, that was not really the best idea because the problems in Alzheimer's disease are complex, the data are complex, and we want people to really have the time to dig into it. So we're going to give participants a longer time, perhaps up to a year, to ensure that they can thoroughly address important questions relevant to AD. The real opportunity here is for us to say, rather than broadly inviting the community to participate as we've done before, we continue to do that, but we want this challenge to be able to focus on people who are going to make a considerable part of their work reusing these data to understand big questions in Alzheimer's disease. So I think I'm going to stop there because this may be a better topic for discussion than for me to ramble on about the size of these challenges. Please do, if you haven't, visit us at the ADDI at our website or the AD Workbench. Thank you, Kim, for providing the links there, and happy to take questions or comments here. And Rebecca, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. You would think I would have mastered the Zoom by now. First of all, do you have any questions for each other before I dive in? Okay.
Well,
Go ahead, Patrick.
So Denise, I mean, I think the structure of your challenge is a really interesting one in that it's really designed more for what are you going to do with your discoveries of the data than discovering the data. Is that because you're too impatient?
I
In a
think
good sense.
so it's interesting when Rebecca was showing the output slides, in the original beginning of the presentation, and I was looking at, oh yes, these are the outputs that we're interested in. We are obviously very much interested in publications because, like my closing slide, unless you share the knowledge, that's a publication is a way to share knowledge, but we are pushing the field to create more solutions also for people living with type 1 diabetes, because as I mentioned, we have tools, but they can be better and they can help people manage exercise better. And we think it's possible with this data, because until this time, there was no such big observational data that was made available for public researchers. So we think this could be potentially be a game changer to help people mitigate this trial and error method that they're using today, which is far from perfect. But yes, it's both. So we want researchers to go and publish from the existing data, but we also want the field to move towards solutions. And I think that's similar to yours, that we want to get new eyes to this data, because I think Vivli's platform's benefit is to be able to open it up to the beyond the usual suspect and beyond who would normally look at this information. It could be intriguing for new types of people who may not have thought about using it for type 1 or for Alzheimer's. And in our case, we're actually happy to marry data scientists or algorithm makers with excellent type 1 diabetes experts, because we have reach to those experts, but we know less of the people who are not in our circle.
No, I think that's exactly right, Denise. And everything that we have to do is a real balance. When you set this thing up, you dream about, a researcher in the middle of nowhere that nobody's ever heard of, who came up with that incredible idea that nobody else had thought of, that solves the whole problem. And that leads you to do these challenges that are really broad, because you want to make sure you've cast the net to catch all of those people. At the same time, the kind of challenge you can run when you open it up to everybody is one that's kind of time and resource limited. And so maybe you end up not providing the resources that are important to the people who are most likely to do it. On the other hand, to say, let's take the top 10 grant winners over the last 10 years and give them another opportunity, will help facilitate them. There are probably some of those in this meeting right now, and you're doing great work, keep doing it. But part of what we want to do is encourage other people. And so the challenge we're trying to formulate now, we hope strikes that balance where initially we're asking anybody to come up with an idea. We want to then pick a portfolio of ideas that may range from, obvious, but this person is a great scientist in the field and we think they're really going to make a difference, to this is a real outlier, but let's make sure that that person has the resources that they need to bring that study to the finish line. And then make sure through, one of the reasons that we created AD Connect, ultimately publication is the gold standard. And, we support Vivli's drive to get peer-reviewed publications as an outcome for this. But we also want to make sure that the community can get this as quickly as possible. So we created AD Connect. One of the things we'd like to do is ask participants, please share with the community in real time what you can. It doesn't have to be the results, but it could be your thoughts or your experiments. Generate enthusiasm around doing this, bring other people into the community. And sometimes those negative results, they're hard to get into peer-reviewed publications, but people need to know about them. We want to provide a forum for disseminating that as well.
Yes, cannot agree
Terrific.
more. One question, Tetsu, do you mandate or do you encourage data standards when your researchers are collecting data, the CDISC data standards?
The short answer there is that we think that novelty and curation in the use of those standards is probably going to be one of the things that will help open the field up. So we do provide through the workbench, and we're working on a project with Dementia Platform UK in particular to make sure that there are multiple curation schemes available for harmonization on the AD workbench. So if you want to use the CDISC standard, that's available for your use. If you want to use the CSERV standard, for example, which is more designed for longitudinal cohort studies as opposed to clinical trials, that one's available for you also. I think the idea that we really need to start investing time and effort into helping people curate and harmonize data is one of those key barrier lowering events that we'll have to do to get people using it.
Great.
Thank you. And just to close out this segment, I'm going to ask both of you one question. I know this has been a tremendous investment for both Helmsley Charitable Trust and ADDI. If I can ask you, what would be the best, if it's successful, and I know both of them will be, what would be the best possible outcome for your challenge? If you're to play this forward a year, and I would say, this challenge has been a success. I'll turn to you first, Denise, and say, this challenge has been a success because?
It would be really a dream of ours, and if there was a therapy or a technology solution that really gives people with type 1 diabetes ease in managing type 1 diabetes and exercise, because we know that hypoglycemia fear or the after effect of exercise, hyperglycemia fear sometimes deters people from exercising. And we think that, for example, if there was a therapy, a pill that you could take before going on exercise, or if your device had glucagon that kind of balanced your insulin intake as well as the glucagon intake automatically based on your exercise performance, those would be incredibly impactful.
Wow, that would be terrific. And I look forward to hearing about that next year, hopefully. Tetsu.
That would be great. And I dream of the day when, the Alzheimer's field is far enough along that we can focus on outcomes like that. Of course, we could get them and that would be great. I would say for our challenge, there are a number of important outcomes potentially. One would be that someone uses it to raise an issue that causes the field to rethink some of the assumptions that we have right now, whether that's around what you might want to call patient stratification, or I like to think of as appropriate diagnosis of a whole range of dementias, whether it's around targets or target systems that might be addressed, whether it's around the value of existing or future therapeutics. Any of those questions would be great. The second set of outcomes for us would be a rush of people coming to Alzheimer's data sharing platforms and requesting and using the data to ask further questions.
Terrific. Well, thanks to you both, and look forward to interacting with you later on in our segment. I'm going to turn it over to Julie. Actually, so let me see. Okay, so we have our next steps in discussion. Next. Oh, okay. Thanks so much, Julie. So what I'll do next is introduce you to our next, our platform that's just launched this year, our AMR register. And I'll spend just maybe 2 or 3 minutes talking about our AMR register. Currently, AMR causes about 700,000 deaths per year, and we're looking at this as potentially the next silent pandemic. There's an opportunity to really address this proactively. Currently, there was no single platform for high-quality industry surveillance, data. And this type of data is mandated to be collected by industry prior to a drug being put on the market. So we were funded by the Wellcome Trust to launch a platform this summer. This data could be used to detect trends in multi-drug resistance over time, inform national and international policy and antibiotic stewardship, and allow modeling of future resistance trends. We have an AMR founding steering committee that's comprised of a set of companies that came forward to share their surveillance data. That includes Pfizer, GSK, Shionogi, Merck, Venatorix, Paratech, J&J, and Viatris. So these companies are actually sharing their surveillance data within this AMR register. So we're really delighted. This is a separate register than our Vivli clinical trials data sharing platform. So since this platform has been live, we already are getting requests in. It covers over 60,000 isolates from over 85 countries on 500 organisms. Many of them are from LMICs, which are of great interest. And so we're really delighted to be able to offer this to researchers, public health officials, and others who are asking really interesting questions about the AMR surveillance data. We just wanted to make you aware of this and to get the word out of this about this unique platform. I'll turn it over to Julie now for this next segment. Julie?
There we go. Couldn't find the unmute button. Anyway, hi everyone. I'm Julie Wood. I'm the Senior Director at Vivli. I just wanted to spend a minute really just thanking our members who are really work with the Vivli team to make this all possible and do share and go kind of above and beyond to do all they can to share their data. All the members are listed here. And the ones with the red circle are our new members who have joined this year. And then, so that was our industry new members. And then you can see we also have some new members from the NIH data sharing community, including NIH HEAL and NIDDK Central Repository that have also joined Vivli. And speaking on behalf of those new members, I would like to introduce Karen Anthony, who has agreed to kind of share her experiences of what it's like to be a new member of Vivli. So I'm going to turn over to Karen to just share her experiences. Thanks so much for joining us, Karen.
Thank you, Julie, for introducing me. And also thank you for giving me the opportunity on behalf of Sanofi to share our first impressions and experience with Vivli as a Vivli member. So let me see if this works. Yes. So I thought that I will start with a little bit of background. So like probably most of the Vivli members, Sanofi has a long history of sharing data externally. We are contributing data to initiatives for secondary research since many years. We were the founding members of another data sharing portal, CSDR, and have shared since then data regularly with external researchers. Then when Vivli was founded, to be frank, it took us a while to get to a point of decision for a change and to move on. But eventually our main reason for becoming a member of Vivli was that we chose to go beyond just checking the box when it comes to our data sharing commitment. Instead, we wanted to be part of a portal that combines both, being most attractive to the research community and also providing us as the sponsor maximum support. So it's now been about 9 months that we are a member of Vivli, and yeah, we are happy for our choice, with our choice, for several reasons, which I would like to share the following. So obviously there's this growing number of member companies we just heard, and the number of trials available for requests to the research community, which are both impressive, promising, and we think very attractive for research, secondary research. But we also think that Vivli does a great job in supporting us, the sponsors, by taking on a lot of the administrative burden and workload we were used to do ourselves up to now. So when we transitioned to Vivli, we had about 30 requests that we planned to move over to the Vivli platform. And I can share, yes, it was a lot of work, but at the same time, we experienced great and very sufficient support from the Vivli team, which made it doable to transition everything over really within a few months. So yeah, thank you again for this support and great experience. And then now having insight how Vivli works at the back end and looking at the day-to-day operations, we experienced that Vivli, we can say, significantly simplifies our process and reduces really our administrative workload. So let me just share a few points here. The ease to communicate with Vivli and the research team, and less need to communicate with other sponsors, since those steps are taken on by Vivli. Having the same process for listed and unlisted studies is something which benefits us at least. No need to execute a data sharing any longer. And I'm sure those who have shared via other portals know what I'm talking about. Export requests. Here, it wasn't easy for us to give up this kind of control. And to be honest, we wish to have a little bit more transparency on the rules of exports. But eventually it comes with a great facilitation for our workload. And then last but not least, the chasing of manuscripts for publication and other tasks, which Vivli supports greatly. And then last but not least, what we appreciate also very much is the very proactive approach when it comes to moving requests along, especially the persistence in following up in getting things done, to jump in, to send reminders, and so on. So these are just first impressions we think are really great. And then also the very proactive approach in implementing changes operationally, or the website, and this constant looking for new opportunities to widen, to enhance data sharing. So in a nutshell, we consider being a member of Vivli as a great benefit and improvement to our own process. And we are sure we made the right choice. Maybe as a last point, what I wanted to also share are a few things we think could be or could have a potential for future improvements for Vivli. Engagement in the standardization of how data are anonymized for data sharing. I think we heard about this earlier today, is something we think would benefit clearly the research community. then having a lighter process for sharing clinical documents or summary table information via secure environment is something we think could be looked into, or something like being a protective repository for genetic and genomic data in the future is something we think would certainly greatly enhance the Vivli portal. So thank you for listening, and I pass it back on to Julie.
Thank you so much, Karen. We really appreciate your comments and having you as a member as we do our continued discussions with all of our members. Thank you. I'm going to turn back to Rebecca.
Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to acknowledge our board of directors. That really is the governance for Vivli, since we're a nonprofit. And thank you for those of them that are here today, and really want to acknowledge them. Mike Stebbins is our board chair. Next, I'd like to acknowledge the members of our team. So as I call your name, I know you've met Julie Wood, our senior director, Stan Newman. Stan, if you could show your camera, who's our director of technical operations. Kim Alifi, our admin coordinator. I know many of you have met Kim through email, and Rusa Bhaskaran, our associate director of operations. Many of you interact with Rusa. Catherine Darcy, located in the UK. Sienna Deer, our project coordinator. Will Gorgiadis on the tech team. Liz Graham, our senior clinical data manager. Bill O'Neill. Bill is our principal software engineer. Gabby Regan, our clinical data manager. Irene Trupansky, senior software architect. Louis Seaton, who sits on the back end and helps us the grants and finance. Marsha Levenstein, our senior advisor. Frank, who I don't believe is here today. We also have a senior advisor in Japan, Azusa Takeda, who's helping us with our Japan region. Japan's very important to us. Elizabeth Connolly. Elizabeth, if you can, who's really important to us. She's our software engineer from Insight, and Jared Meyer, who's our architect from Insight. I know we have a big team, but it's really important for us to support our members as well as our researchers. So thanks to all of you. So next, I'd like to really just, talk a little bit, give a 1-minute reflection on the meeting before we move on to our next segment, which you'll all participate in. The common themes I've really gathered from is that we've all come together to enable the data sharing ecosystem. That's really the theme of this meeting. And each of us, whether we're contributing data, our researcher using the data, or being part of playing the role of a funder, or bringing a valuable service to enable the data system to run smoothly, are all enabling this data sharing ecosystem. Listening to the COVID panel, I'm personally inspired by how far the data contributors and funding community have come together in a time of pandemic. I think we need to further get the word out for these valuable data sets and really lower the barriers to access. I think that's something that we could work together on. Dr. Gregorick's talk was very motivating and exciting to think about all the data that will now be flowing in, reused, and further leveraged that would not have been except for the leadership of NIH. So I must say that I find the resources that have been shared by NIH surrounding this rollout have been excellent and very clear, including Dr. Gregorick's talk. So those slides will be shared. The two challenges were very different, but new ways to inspire researchers to harness clinical trial data in novel ways, and perhaps even change the trajectory of disease in T1D and Alzheimer's disease. I look forward to checking back, and hopefully we'll give you all an update to hearing about this next year on the outputs of these challenges. Hearing firsthand from Karen one of our newest members, Sanofi. It was refreshing hearing from her reflections and taking her feedback. Thank you so much, Karen. So some key messages I heard: to move forward together, we can work together on lowering the barriers of interoperability and access. I think we heard that clearly as some themes, how we could work together on that. I think we together, in the last 4 years that Vivli's been kind of launched, have worked together effectively to lower the barriers to data sharing. I think probably the next thing is to lowering the barriers to accessing this data, perhaps interoperability, maybe harmonizing the data sets. And those are things that we can think about doing together. So next, I'd like to hand it back over to Julie for the next segment that we'll be participating in.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. So we wanted to kind of get I can see that some people have already filled this out. We have a couple of poll questions as we move to kind of the more interactive elements of this, of our meeting today. We loved all the Q&A, but also just want to get a sense for all the spread of where everyone is joining us from, because we are global. And I can see, we have people joining us from Japan, Europe, all across the United States, a little more on the East Coast. Oh, now we have some in Canada. So please do just respond at the poll. You have the browser link at the top, and the link should be going in the chat as well. I'm sure it already has. Yes, Kim already put it in. So just to get a spread, and we have someone also joining us from Africa as well. So that is great. And it's just wonderful to see as data continues to grow. I hope to see kind of green pins across the globe as we move forward in future. So thank you for that. And then the next question that we have for you is, we really want to know what more you want to hear more about. There have been a lot of things we've talked about today with lots of interactive elements. Again, the poll, it'll be starting and we should see things appearing shortly. But would love to hear what you have to think and want to hear more about, so we can think about over the next year to continue that discussion. In addition, we're now to more the more informal part of the discussion. Okay, there's a topic on data quality. That's wonderful. And as we do that, we would just, after you answer the poll, if you have questions and can take part in the more informal discussions, we're going to start. Please accept the invitation, as we will be upgrading everyone so you can talk and share your cameras, so we can just have an informal conversation. Oh, I can see examples of use cases. That's a great one. Data harmonization, more success stories, data quality for real world data, impact of secondary analysis from Vivli, sharing new data. These are all great topics, and some things that have come up today and more. So please do send those through. We will look at those as they keep coming up. Please also accept the invitation you'll see on your Zoom, so that you can talk and share your screen. Share your camera and unmute. So we are going to stop recording the recording session of this, so we can just have a more relaxed conversation. Tokenization, classification.